Hello humans, welcome to The Frontline, a leadership and business podcast brought to you by Peregrine Corporate Services, an Isle of Man-based fiduciary provider. My name is Martin Hall. Thank you for listening. Today we are joined by Bill, Director of Celton and also a Director of Manx Utility, and is also Chairman of Manx Radio, and also has many interactions with Isle of Man Life. Thanks for joining us today. So perhaps just provide the listeners a little bit of background on yourself. Where did you grow up originally, Bill? What was your background and schooling?
Okay. I was born and brought up in rural Lincolnshire, good farming county. But then as I pursued higher education, I chose electronics as a core subject. And that led me into the design and build of television broadcast infrastructure, which was at that time was fascinating. And in fact, I'm just old enough to have been part of a team that was directly involved in the launch of colour television in the UK in 1968. So that rather dates me.
What took you into electronics? Was that something just you fascinated at a younger age that was an interest to you?
As often these things do, I had an uncle who was into in that era things like amateur radio and so forth. And then as television came along, I can remember as a very young child, sort of 8 years old, helping him put the aerial up and switch on the first TV that my family owned, which was for the coronation in 1953. And it's amazing that those very young experiences form your life in a way.
Yeah, they provide that. Yeah, it's an imprint, isn't it, I guess, from a very early stage. Yeah. What unis, I presume it was university that you went through. Where was that?
I went to Technical University in Leicestershire.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. So then moving into working life from uni, where did working life start for you?
Again, working life started initially in a branch environment, one of 800 branches in Granada, and partly through my level of technical achievement, writing and conducting and invigilating at trade examinations and so forth, I sort of moved away a little bit from the hands-on technical stuff. And I think at about 28 years of age, which is when I was asked to go and start a long overseas career.
Okay.
I had responsibility for about 150 operations within Granada. So again, at a relatively young age, that's quite a big job.
Yeah.
I think one of the points I make is when I look back and how people should make decisions in their lives and in their careers. I had a phone call on a New Year's Eve, and I was in one of my units 100 miles away from home, and it was snowing. I got a phone call at 5 p.m, slightly irritated that my main board director should think he was going to find me in one of my offices at 5 on New Year's Eve. Resulted in me going down to London on the 3rd of January. And later that day, I was in Trafalgar Square at South Africa House. And 2 weeks later, I landed in Johannesburg. The point there being, you were presented with an opportunity, a challenge, but the circumstance was that you didn't have time to cogitate on it. And I just made a decision and said, yep, that's what I'm going to do.
And did you have family at that stage you had to take with you?
I did, yeah. I had young children.
Right.
And that had its challenges. I ended up being very involved in building a school when I arrived in Swaziland because of educational issues, which today is a very valuable asset in the country.
Sure.
And it's a very small world. Our Lieutenant Governor here, Sir Richard Gosney, and his wife, Lady Gosney, he did 3 years as British High Commissioner in Swaziland just after my time.
Right.
But their children went to the school that I
oh, right. Small world.
Yeah. But what I actually, above everything else, what I feel is when opportunities present themselves, it's not always right to say yes, but I look down the other end of the telescope and say, is it really right to say no? And what I found is that life is it's a series of chapters, and the key thing is some of them will be very good for you, some of them won't be so good. That isn't the point. The point is recognizing when a chapter has naturally come to end, move forward, don't look back, and go forward. And I know that that's helped me tremendously in the way that I've had a very varied sort of life and career.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting sort of perception of how to approach it. Out of interest, when you went to that, what was that project that took you out there? What was the bigger kind of headlines of it?
Very originally, it was because South African Broadcasting Corporation was due to come on stream in the second quarter of 75. Unnaturally, for all of the dynamics of South Africa, and especially during the 70s and early 80s, it was quite late as a major country to acquire television. At the South African Broadcasting Corporation. So I went out to provide some technical expertise there. Just as I thought my role was coming to an end, there's this wonderful kingdom called Swaziland, which was a British protectorate until 66, and then gained its independence. It's never been part of South Africa as well. And it had this wonderful man, Sabusa, who was the oldest reigning monarch and the longest reigning monarch. And again, one of the highlights of my career, my life, is I got to know this King Sabusa very well indeed. I have two daughters. The slightly older one, without doubt, is a Swazi in her cultural outlook. Every day she speaks to a young teenager, as I knew her, that used to spend time with us and weekends and so on. And they still speak 30 years later, weekly, at least once a week. And that young lady today is the Queen Regent of Swaziland.
Oh, very nice.
And when you have children that you sort of drag around the world with you, Africa and then Asia, and you see those sort of relationships that they formed and maintained, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to board my children. I chose not to, on the basis that if I was going to have this career and
those experiences, aren't they?
Yeah, so I have one daughter who is a Swazi, and the other one who is fluent in Cantonese and Mandarin, and her outlook is very much Asia.
Right. Okay.
So she works in a hospital in Adelaide, in Australia, on a teenage cancer project. But because she speaks Cantonese and Mandarin, she regularly gets to fly Australia to Shanghai and Beijing to present papers and updates from this cancer project to their counterparts in China. So again, I look back and think, what have your daughters achieved? How have they achieved? And that one decision, more or less on a New Year's Eve in 74, to say, yes, I'll do that, has done much more than develop your career. It shaped the lives of your daughters.
Yeah, that ripple effect, isn't it? Yeah, that's really. So what took you to Asia from?
Okay, well then, after 10 years in Africa, the time was right for us to step out of the broadcast corporation that we built and developed. I was lucky enough to then have 5 months at Henley, the Management College down on the Thames, which is a life-changing experience in itself. My chairman's theory was that would help shake Africa off your feet and prepare you for a completely different business environment based in Hong Kong. We had some significant interests in Asia and based in Hong Kong. And within the group, I think the job of managing director of the Hong Kong business was seen as the plum job in the group. And after I did my 5 months at Henley, I was given the role of MD out in Hong Kong. Right. Very small world. My predecessor was the son of one of the founders of the group, who gave it up after about 4 years because he wanted to go off and run a trout farm. 30 years later, I arrive in the Isle of Man, and I'm living up in Ramsey, and about half a mile away from me was my predecessor in Hong Kong.
Back to that small world. Yeah.
And you would know, may not be pertinent to you would know the name Paul Moulton.
Yep.
Well, the guy I replaced in Hong Kong was his father, and one of my mentors in building my career in the group was Paul Moulton's grandfather.
Oh, right. Okay. Wow.
So it's a very, very small world. You know?
Yeah, indeed. And you mentioned there, obviously, mentors. Is that something throughout your career you've always looked around to find mentors, or is that something that just you naturally attract to?
Certainly in a formative period. Again, one of my observations is if you are part of a large group and you're identified as having some promise and you are accelerated in your career development, that is fantastic and it helps tremendously. The danger is if you stay as an overseas chief exec for too many years, one could argue I did over 20 years, the danger is if you then want to return to your parent group, everyone will say, Bill who? Because your mentors have long since passed on and you've been out with the core mainstream of the group. In my case, I came back after 20 years, and in fairness to the Granada Group, I was given a seat on the board.
Right.
But I think you have to make choices and be aware that if you choose to spend a long career overseas, it's for some people it's a fantastic life opportunity. But I'd caution about staying away for too long if you think that ultimately the rest of your career will be back in the parent group, because, as I say, the people that sponsored you and helped you on your way will not be there to help you when you come back.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So what brought you back in the end, or to the UK
because,
initially?
I was running the Hong Kong operations, and I'd just done a deal to sell our business in Singapore, and then my group itself was acquired, and so then it was a question of tidying up the sale and purchase in Asia, coming back to London, not knowing what I might do. Again, I joined the board, and again I came to the Isle of Man. I've never been here in my life. After 3 weeks in Japan, I came over to represent the group at an annual staff function here on the island. Say a few words, talk to people, have a look at the business. And I went back and said, well, clearly it's not core. We don't understand it. We're not supporting it. We need to do something with it. We did. 12 months later, I went to the board and proposed that I did a management buyout and bought the business here in the Isle of Man.
Oh, right, okay.
So through your whole career, either a big step to go out to Africa in the early 70s and moving on to Asia for another 10, 11 years, to then make a decision after 2 years back in the UK to say, this is what I'm going to do. I think there's a certain consistency there.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And so I've been here since 1990.
Okay. And I assume you love the island.
Yeah, it's home. I mean, again, I won't say I'm privileged. I've worked very hard, as lots of other people do, to achieve what their goals are. But I have a home in America. I've got 2 daughters in Australia, but the Isle of Man is home.
Just to go back to, you mentioned earlier about being young when you were younger, I think around 28, you mentioned being put in that leadership role. How was that something that just came naturally to you, leadership, do you feel? Appreciating that's a very broad word, leadership, but.
Yeah, again, it's very interesting. By nature, and it's one of those things, if it's ingrained in your nature, it doesn't ever change. You just have coping mechanisms to deal with it and develop it and certainly make sure it's not an encumbrance. But I always was and still am quite a reserved, shy individual. And people that know me would fall about laughing if they heard that. But that's only because you haven't fought with it. You've learned to deal with it. But I think, again, one of the things I learned through my 2 distinctly different overseas roles in developing Africa and then in highly developed Hong Kong and Asia is you go there as a guest in someone else's nation. Remember that, behave as if you are a guest in someone else's nation, respect it, try and learn as much as you can about it, its systems and its culture, try and learn the language, even a poor speaker of the local language. I don't speak French or German. I do speak Siswati, Zulu, speak some Dutch Afrikaans, and I speak Cantonese. But all of that is driven by the belief that that's one of the ways that you gain the support and respect.
Yeah, respect, yeah.
When this foreign guilo has been parachuted in to run the business. Respect isn't given, it's earned. People don't follow you because you are the chief exec. They follow you because they believe in your vision and they want to support you in achieving that.
So I guess part of that for you being a leader is getting that communication, getting that message across and being that leader.
Very much so. And there is, I think the issues around that are multiplied a number of times when you're doing it in different cultures around the world.
Yeah, I'm sure.
As opposed to a concentric UK European.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. So today, I suppose, as it is now, what roles do you have now? Well, you have many roles now. Do you want to chat through some of those?
Yeah,
What keeps you busy?
My day job is Celton Manx. That name won't mean a lot to people, but if you're at all a football fan, particularly English Premier League, the actual brand is SBO Bet. For 4.5 years, I had the pleasure of working with the lovely Baroness Brady as main sponsor of West Ham. I started this business for the Asian shareholder group back in 2008, and it's literally a global leader in sports betting. Its core activities are Asia, but it's got a very global footprint, and from small beginnings, it is now a global leader in what it does.
Right.
So,
okay. Yeah. And that's obviously headquartered out of the island.
Yeah, Mind and Management is here. I've got another 30 to 40 people building en route to the island over the coming months. And that's got nothing to do with the CV19. It is recognition that one has to have a fully functioning, not a disaster recovery, but you need, because of international drift and in uncertainties for various reasons around the world, the Isle of Man is where we're licensed and regulated. It's where our Mind and Management is.
Yeah.
We've been licensed here now, as I say, for 13 years or so. So it's very useful, given that there are certain types of instability, everything from climatic through political, things that can interrupt your business in Asia. So to have a fully functioning presence here where we can do everything that is needed, and clearly one of our core strengths is technology.
Yeah.
Whenever I go to the car park and park my car and I want to use my card to pay for my car park ticket, and you stand there and you wait and you wait and you wait. And I'm always reminded that on a Saturday or a Sunday when Premier League is functioning and so on, we would process credit card, debit card transactions as opposed to credit card. We would process card transactions and monetary transactions at a rate of 2,000 a second.
Right. Yeah.
And it takes the car park machine 3 minutes to give you a car park.
Yeah. And you've also got other roles within the Arm. You're chairman of, obviously, Manx Radio as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, initially when I started that sort of involvement and portfolio, I had a serious discussion with my shareholders saying, look, are you comfortable for me to take on I think the first role was joining the board of Manx Utilities, Manx Electricity it was, because clearly there is a time element. I'm more than happy to give her my time, but it is going to encroach on the working day. And their view was absolutely. I think it comes back to that general belief that even in the context of the Isle of Man, we're an Asian group. We came to the Isle of Man for valid reasons, the technical infrastructure, the legal framework, the gaming legislation, good reasons to come to the Isle of Man. But we have, by our presence here, we've built a very, very successful business. And you have to recognize that that in no small measure is due to the fabric of the Isle of Man. Therefore, it's right to be prepared to put something back into that community and that society. So Manx Utilities now, I think, 12 years. I serve on the board of the Public Service Commission, as that's a second government role. I've got other interests in the third sector, chairman of Housing Matters, which is very topical at the moment with the issues of homelessness, which are coming to the fore in the crisis that we're in.
Yeah.
I've served on the board of the Chamber of Commerce for about 10 years.
Right.
So, great believer in the Isle of Man is basically, in world terms, per capita, is a wealthy, relatively wealthy nation. However, it still has some way to go in that it is, in certain ways, it's a divided nation. And there are people that need support. So whether it's in terms of homelessness, or again, I'm probably one of the oldest Rotarians on the planet. I did my first year as president of Rotary in Swaziland in 1978.
Wow. Okay.
And I've repeated that in Hong Kong, and I've repeated it here on the island. And just because basic ethos, I won't say the world has been kind to you. You've worked hard for whatever level of achievement and reward you have, but that's got nothing to do with whether you should be prepared to put back into this community that you're part of.
Yeah. Well, I see you obviously do a lot of charity work. I know recently as well. See the podcast as well. We talk about entrepreneurs, and you supported the Junior Achievement Awards for that as well. I presume that's important to yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. One of the issues I have in the public listed sector that obviously I've worked in with Granada and more recently an AIM listing that I was part of, is the basic tenet of shareholders, particularly institutional shareholders, is you have no mandate to engage in social projects. Your only mandate is to maximize profits for us as a shareholder group. And I think I understand the logic behind that, but I think it's sort of derailed itself. And I don't think that public listed companies achieve to their optimal. Even they operate in a society with the tacit approval of the citizens, whether you're John Lewis or Debenhams or, to use for two fairly extreme examples.
Yeah.
So to engage and put back into the community, which allows you and your business to develop and succeed, is absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we spoke briefly before the podcast started. I must say we've obviously never met before. My observations in the brief half an hour is you're obviously very driven, very busy. I assume you don't really sleep too much. Again, is there a desire ever to slow down, or is it just to continue to do those good things as well?
Yeah, well, I don't regard it as doing good things. I just think they are as rewarding to me as the day job. I am definitely not retirement material. If you're blessed with good health and your brain still works and you have the energy, in a few months' time, and I don't wish to sound at all arrogant, in a few weeks, 3 months' time, I'm 75, and I'm not your average 75-year-old, and I'm very, very fortunate. So, in a way, your historical background. I have one parent that lived to 102, and their parents, and so on and so forth. If you have the right genes, and it's right for you, clearly there are people in a similar position to myself who, for example, would be golfing in Florida now and living there, not working.
That doesn't appeal to you?
No. Getting time to spend there appeals to me, as it does with my daughters in Australia. But it's not, for me, it's not a lifestyle. No.
Yeah, okay. And then just to close up, generally speaking, I mean, do you do a lot of, I use the word self-development, do you do a lot of reading of other people in business, in positions to learn and develop?
I saw
any book recommendations off the back of that?
Yeah, I saw on your note a question about, what reading do you do? Perhaps not surprisingly, I'm not a reader of non-fiction and hardbacks generally. I'm an avid reader of current affairs, of politics, and certain international parts of the world. Clearly, I maintain an interest in matters Africa, equally Asia. But I think it's absolutely vital in my role to keep yourself well informed, and rather than narrowing your focus, you should be doing exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
And a lot of the decisions you make, even if you're not conscious of it, are informed by your broader outlook and scope. Yes, lots of reading, but it's largely non-fiction, and it's politics, and it's economics, basically.
And thank you. And if people want to reach out, I guess, and just again chatting to you for half an hour, I'd even think of an 18-year-old who wants to get into business and just wants a bit of advice, you'd probably open your door and tell them to come and sit in front of you. So if people want to reach out to you in any format, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, I think you've got my email address.
Yeah, I can share that in our footer notes if you don't mind.
I really don't mind you sharing my contact number.
Yeah, okay.
One of the regular things we do in partnership with government is the STEP program.
Okay, yeah, been through that. Yep.
And I was one of the two judges last year. Sadly, it's not taking place this year, but that STEP program is an extremely valuable tool for both. And it's typically a situation where it's a win-win. The employer that takes on the undergraduate for 6 or 8 weeks, they benefit, and with the right mentoring, so does the student.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for your time today. It's been much appreciated. Very fascinating.
Listen, it's my pleasure. So if it's been too much of a ramble, but
not at all. I think I could ramble for hours. So it's more trying to keep it to a tight half an hour. But no, I appreciate your time. Thanks for listening, people.